Today's enthusiast could be a totally bonkers former radio DJ who regularly inflicted terrible pain on his listeners with his appalling guitar playing. Or could turn out to be quite an accomplished string picker, lyricist and songwriter who has many successful stage shows to his credit. Be terrible if it was both though, wouldn't it?
This is Mike Reed on Classic FM. Come in, Peter.
This is about growing up, Mr. Reed.
Oh, it's terribly, isn't it? I'm wearing long trousers as well. How are you?
I'm great, thanks.
Good.
Now, your personal passion, I would hazard a guess it's something to do with collecting classic guitars or something. Am I wide of the mark?
You're not wide of the mark. I do have a lot of passions, but one of the overriding passions, I suppose, is Rupert Brooke, the First World War poet.
The Gilded Youth of First World War poetry?
Indeed, yes. I mean, I've worked with Brooke as a stage musical, I've done a biography and a film screenplay, so sort of three different Brooke hats. So I do feel he's a chum, and if you want to see some more bits and pieces, we'll pop down to my place, put the kettle on, sit in the garden, have tea, and we can chat about it.
So how far do you and Rupert Brooke go back then, Mike?
We go back to 1887, me and Rupert, and which is, of course, when he was born. So I think that's when the interest began, at least for him, if not for me.
But I would have thought, being kind of close to rock and roll, you would have been alongside the kind of the anti-war poets like the Sigrid Sassoons and the Wilfred Owens. What is it about Brooke then that got you?
Well, people often criticise Brooke for glorifying war, which of course he didn't. His poems weren't about the glorification of war. Also, of course, he died a day short of Gallipoli. If he lived through the war, of course, his poems would have changed, as they all did. I mean, you know, like Owen, Sassoon. I mean, if Brooke had lived through the war, he'd have certainly written about the horrors of it. But
you haven't simply studied the poetry of Rupert Brooke. You've hunted down, you know, objects and items from his actual life, haven't you?
Yes, that's not really deliberate. That was in passing. When you're writing biography, you pick things up, or you tend to go and try and find things, and you really pick up things by default, as well as learning a lot about the person. But have you finished your tea, by the way?
Yes, I have.
Are you sure? Oh, I'll let you inside.
As much as I'll drink of it, yes.
Thanks. Right, I've got stuff inside that might interest you. You see, you never thought when you got into the presenting game that you'd have to carry stuff. I've got quite a few bits and pieces in here, if I can find them, in amongst the Rupert Bear and the Beano and the Oscar Wildes and bits and pieces.
We don't have time for your other sick obsession. In Brooke terms, what's your kind of your main object that you've?
Well, there are so many of them. I mean, a good starting point maybe would be something like this, which is a first edition. There are only 500 printed, and Brooke's mother paid for them, and the contract between Brooke and the publisher was witnessed by Virginia Woolf.
Really?
Yeah.
It's extraordinary, though, that Brooke has such an enduring reputation, though, and I mean, it's based on that, basically, that little book of which there were 500?
That one little book. He could have gone on to be quite a good playwright. He really wanted to write more plays and had met the right people. He was seeing a lot of Kathleen Nesbitt, the actress, and he met a friend called Morris Brown in Chicago who put plays on and produced plays. So I think they had a vague plan to go to Paris maybe after the war, whereas Morris Brown would produce, Kathleen Nesbitt would act, and he would write. But this was the only play that he actually wrote in his lifetime. It's not really much. It's a bit lightweight, and it's a bit of an old story, but it's called Lithuania. And here's an original program from it, which is quite nice, but it's falling apart a little bit now.
Aside from the actual pieces of writing, have you got any things that are personal to Brooke himself?
Yes, I have, actually. There are quite a few bits and pieces that I've accumulated one way or another. Brooke is on the front page here of the Times, and inside is the actual obituary written by Churchill. Here it is, on page 5. On the same page as the write-up on the FA Cup final.
Unexciting cup final?
Yeah, that's right.
It was ever thus.
And that was Sheffield United against Chelsea. And here it actually is. This is the actual paper from the 26th of April. Of course, he'd died 3 days before. When he was in Canada, he lost a lot of his writing. There's nothing worse for a poet or a writer to lose something you've written. You think, I'm never going to see it again, I can't quite remember it. And he got to San Francisco and he was distraught at the fact that he'd lost all this stuff. And recently, a couple of years ago, one of the poems came up. It's clearly one of those that he'd lost in British Columbia. And this is it. And it's called For Mildred Zern. This is actually the poem with his writing. Oh, this is the original. And I couldn't work out what it was about to start with. And then it suddenly dawned on me that when Brooke went to America in May 1913, he sailed on the SS Cedric. Also on board the SS Cedric was Liverpool poet Richard Le Gallienne. Richard Le Gallienne's first wife was called Mildred, and he used to carry her ashes around in an urn. So I guess at first I thought, is this Brooke being sarcastic? Because he was a bit sarcastic in his letters about Le Gallienne, this grizzled old poet on board. And I read it again and I thought, no, actually he's genuine. He thought, my golly, this guy carries his wife around with him. And I think that's clearly what it's about.
What's this book here with the moon, or the crescent and star on it?
This is a book called Turkey in Europe, which was written by Sir Charles Eliot in 1908. This was the last book that Rupert Brooke got. As you can see aside, he's actually signed it Sub-Lieutenant Rupert Brooke, Hood Battalion, literally a few weeks before he died, February 1915, because he died on April the 23rd. I don't think people realised, you know, quite how World War I was going to turn out. Certainly Brooke didn't. The fact that he was only 27 when he died, yet he was so complex a man, and he had this sort of cathartic trip to the South Seas where he found himself. I mean, he and his friends were the first ones to escape, you know, from their parents and go barefoot, grow their hair long, play guitars, read poetry. And it was all during that period of Edward VII where he said, yep, levity is the key word, we've had Victoriana, let's all have a good time. And they all went out and had a good time and kicked against their parents. One of the first groups to go skiing, used to go off for the weekend unchaperoned. To me, they were what the 60s became. It wasn't until the 60s that this bubble of youth burst and youth had a voice. And I think Brooke and his friends were finding that voice. And that what was interesting to me is they were the forerunners of the 1960s. Got some programs of Brooks from King's. And there were some other artifacts and bits and pieces in there that I didn't realise I was getting, including this rather remarkable thing, which has RB on the front. It's a tooled leather case. It's from Asprey's of Bond Street. And inside is a lock of Brooke's hair, and it has RB just on the side there.
It's amazing that you've been able to get a hold of these objects. I mean, what's the pleasure, if you can describe it, of, you know, owning something like that?
Yes, I don't think, I mean, you're not really owning it, you're only leasing it for a length of time, really, and someday, you know, someone else is going to own it. I mean, it's like any friend. If you get to know them well, then you read something they've done, it does mean more, and it does mean more to you. And I think going to some of the places as well, because I love travelling around Britain, as Brooke did. I mean, he went to so many wonderful places. So for me, that was an enjoyable thing to do, you know, to go to Grantchester, to go to Lulworth Cove, to go to the New Forest, and track down these places that had meant a lot to him. It'd be great for you to come and have a look at Grantchester, because Brooke lived at the Orchard and then at the old vicarage next door, so it really is that little part of England that belongs to Rupert Brooke. Here at the Orchard, Robin Callan and myself have talked for a few years. Robin owns the Orchard and sort of saved it from destruction. We talked about having a Rupert Brooke museum and the Rupert Brooke Society here as well. Some students came down here in 1897 and just pulled up in their boat, walked up here and asked the proprietress at the time, you know, whether she was able to serve them tea or not. And she said, well, yes, I can. And so started a trend of students coming down from Cambridge for tea. And Brooke lived here. And of course, all his friends and lots of well-known people came here. Virginia Woolf used to come and have tea here. Lytton Strachey, E.M. Forster, all friends of Brooke's who came to stay here. And then a lot of royalty came here, a lot of poets, a lot of literary men. The spies from Cambridge came here to have their meetings in the Orchard. It's a wonderful place.
You can kind of see why Virginia Woolf, coming from the Swiss Bloomsbury set, would have referred to Brooke and his chums as the neo-pagans, and he was kind of barefoot most of the time cavorting around here, wasn't he?
He was actually chucked out of this place. Mrs. Stevenson, the proprietor, said, Mr. Brooke, you've got to go because bare feet, and the people in the tea rooms don't like it. You're upsetting people with your bare feet and your long hair. So he eventually moved out of here for that reason, moved to the vicarage next door. There's a wonderful photograph taken, one suspects, certainly sometime in the Edwardian period, you know, 1905, 6, 7, 8, something like that, right here
Fantastic.
We are not cross-dressing for this picture.
Do you imagine the Bloomsbury set being a very kind of London-based, city-based thing? I mean, was it Brooke that drew them here?
People came here because they were interested in Brooke. He was a fascinating character. Henry James came out here to see what this guy was like. And they all came to have a look at him. And of course, he'd strike a pose. He'd put on his sky blue shirt, sit in a punt and say, "Are they coming? Is my hair ready?" I mean, he was a bit of a poser.
Was it something you think that informed his work, this particular place?
It's a great place to work, and it does lull you. I mean, when he was abroad, he wrote of the old vicarage, but I'm sure it was the old vicarage, Grantchester, in his mind, is an amalgam of this area. It's the orchard, the vicarage, the Granta, the river just down at the back here. He felt like home. Just now the lilac is in bloom, all before my little room. And in my flower beds, I think, smile the carnation and the pink. And down the borders, well I know, the poppy and the pansy blow. Oh, there the chestnuts, summer through, beside the river make for you a tunnel of green gloom, and sleep deeply above. And green and deep the stream mysterious glides beneath, green as a dream, and deep as death.
Have you mounted the style many times?
Oh, yes. Yes, styles are very useful. You can take it any way you like, or you can vary it. It's quite interesting.
So is the vicarage unchanged?
Both the orchard and the vicarage are as they were, really, in Brooke's day. Much the same. So this is the old vicarage, and when Brooke was out at war, he'd heard this dreadful rumour that the old vicarage was going to be pulled down, and wrote to his mother saying, "Is it true? You know, are they going to pull the old vicarage down? If so, can you buy it? Save it at all costs." And it wasn't true, as it turned out, the particular rumour. But eventually his mother bought the old vicarage, and she eventually bequeathed it to Dudley Ward, one of Brooke's great friends, and his family.
I mean, this place has poetic inspiration written all over it. It did it for Brooke. Does it do it for you?
When I was writing the biography, I stayed at the orchard for a week, and I stayed in Brooke's old rooms, and I wrote in there, and I actually wrote some poetry when I was there, not deliberately, but I thought, gosh, the last person sitting here writing poetry was Brooke. And of course, I've been back here to Cambridge. The musical settings I did to Brooke's 5 war poems, the 1914 sonnets. You know, that was interesting, coming back to Cambridge and working with the King's College Choir in the chapel, where Brooke used to read often on a Sunday morning.
If I should die, think only this of me, that there's some corner of
In the famous photograph of Brooke sitting here in the garden of the old vicarage, there is an empty deck chair sitting next to him, and I've often wondered who it's for. Stands the church clock 10 to 3. Why don't you try rhyming it with, "And is the honey still for tea?" Just a thought.